The growl was low and precise, and came without warning at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and every person in the corridor of the Harmon Valley Medical Center's third-floor geriatric ward heard it and stopped what they were doing in the involuntary way that the sound of a large dog's growl stops people, not from fear, not exactly, but from the older, deeper instinct that precedes fear. The one that says, something in the room has changed, and you have not yet been told what. The dog was sitting beside the wall outside room 312. He had not moved in 4 hours. He had refused water, refused the piece of jerky a night shift aide had offered at 10, and had sat with the focused, locked-in stillness of a dog conducting an operation, which was exactly what he was doing. He had growled once before, at 9:15, when a different nurse had entered the room, a soft, brief warning that the nurse had reported to the charge nurse, and that the charge nurse had reported to nobody because the dog was certified, and the veteran inside was the patient, and they were not going to make a scene about a growl in a hospital that had enough scenes. This growl was different. It had direction and duration. It was aimed at the woman in the blue scrubs who had just come out of the medication room at the end of the hall and was walking toward room 312 with a tray and a look on her face that the dog had read before she had gone 6 steps. The Marine at the end of the corridor was on his feet before the growl finished. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay with us until the very end. What that camera recorded and what it meant for the man in room 312 is something that will change how you see the people who care for the ones you love. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Reed, USMC, retired, had been in that corridor for 4 hours because his father had been in room 312 for 3 days with a hip replacement that had developed a post-surgical infection that the attending physician had described as serious but manageable, which Marcus had spent 3 days silently translating as, something could go wrong, and if it does, it will be here, in this building, on someone else's watch. He was 43 years old and built like a man whose body had been designed for a specific purpose and had not yet received instructions to stand down, broad and deliberate, 6'2", with close-cropped dark hair and a jaw that had been set in the same expression since Tuesday afternoon, which was the expression of a man containing something he had decided not to release until he understood what he was dealing with. His eyes were a flat, clear gray that in the corridor's fluorescent light had the quality of something industrial. Not unkind, but without give. The eyes of a person who had looked at bad situations long enough to have stopped performing surprise. There was a scar along his left forearm from a wire breach in Sangin that had the neat, flat profile of an old wound that had healed correctly and been used every day since. He had served for 20 years with 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq, 1 classified rotation in Syria that he had no language for in mixed company. He had come home for the last time in 2022, with a chest full of decorations he kept in a box, and the private certainty of a man who had fulfilled every obligation he had taken on, and had some left he hadn't anticipated. His father, Raymond Reed, was 78 years old and had been a machinist in Harmon, Wyoming for 41 years, and had never once in 41 years called his son at a duty station with a problem he could not handle himself. Which meant that the call 3 weeks ago, Raymond's voice with something unfamiliar in it, a quality Marcus had taken 4 seconds to identify as the particular flatness of a man asking for help after a long time of not asking, had brought Marcus from Cheyenne, and under 3 hours he had been in Harmon since. He was not leaving until the infection resolved, the discharge was clean, and Raymond was back in his own kitchen drinking his own coffee. Steele was a 6-year-old German Shepherd, 92 pounds, with a coat that ran from a deep burnished black along the saddle and face to a rich rust red along the chest, legs, and inner ears. A coloring that in the hospital's fluorescent light made him look like something out of an older, more serious world. A dog whose appearance itself communicated something about the business he was in. He had a titanium-reinforced canine tooth on the upper left, a combat replacement from a vehicle clearance in Helmand where the original had been lost to a concrete impact. His handler, Corporal James DeVoe, had joked that Steele had the most expensive smile in the battalion. And that joke had a different weight now, because DeVoe had been killed in the same operation 18 months later, and Marcus had spent 7 months fighting to adopt Steele specifically because he was not willing to let the last thing that had belonged to DeVoe disappear into a kennel. His right rear leg had a healed fracture from that same operation, managed now and fully functional, and he moved with the controlled ground-covering economy of a dog who had learned to work inside his body's actual capacity rather than the one he'd had before. He had been Marcus's for 2 years. In 2 years, Steele had been wrong about a person exactly once, a postal worker in Cheyenne who had startled him from behind, and had, in Marcus's assessment, been working out a different read of that situation ever since. The hospital had required certification documentation at the front desk, which Marcus had produced, and had assigned them a spot in the corridor outside room 312, with the careful accommodation of an institution navigating the intersection of patient rights and infection control protocols. The night shift charge nurse, a woman named Gaines, had been professional and direct, and had told Marcus that his father's evening medication would be administered at 11:30, and that he should ensure the dog did not interfere with the nursing staff. Marcus had said he would. He had meant it when he said it. Raymond Reed had worked the shop floor at Harmon Valley Machine Works from 1974 to 2015. 41 years of 6-day weeks, and iron filings in his hair, and the particular physical competence of a man who had spent his life making things that worked. He was 78 years old, and still built like a machinist, heavy-handed, deliberate, with a face that had been weathered by decades of outdoor work between shifts, and had arrived at this age carrying the architecture of its working years with a kind of rough dignity. He had raised Marcus alone after Marcus's mother left in 1987, which he had done without speeches or self-pity, and with the specific practical love of a man who understood that what a 10-year-old boy needed was breakfast on the table and a father at the games, and the kind of consistency that tells a child the floor will hold. He had driven to every base Marcus was stationed at during the first deployment, once to make sure it was real, that the place existed, that it had walls and mess halls and men in it, and had driven home without saying much about the visit, and had never done it again. But Marcus had known he'd come, and that had been enough. He was sleeping when Marcus looked in at 11. The infection had him running a low fever, and the IV antibiotics were doing their slow pharmaceutical work. And Raymond's face in sleep had the quality of a man who had put down something heavy and was resting his hands. Marcus watched him for a moment through the door glass, and something in his chest did what it always did when he looked at his father these days. A tightening that was not grief, not quite, but was in the neighborhood of grief. The awareness of a thing that would end at an unknown time and could not be negotiated with or outranked. He went back to his chair in the corridor. He didn't hear Steele growl at 9:15 because he had been down the hall at the family consultation area, on the phone with Raymond's attending physician about the specific antibiotics being used and their documented efficacy rate for the strain of infection that had been cultured, which was the kind of question that required a retired Marine's particular tenacity to get answered at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. The night aide had mentioned the growl when Marcus returned. Marcus had looked at Steele, who was sitting in his position outside the door in the locked, precise stillness he used when he had formed a view and was holding it, and Marcus had made a note of it the way he made notes of everything Steele communicated. Not dismissively, not with alarm, but with the calibrated attention of a man who had been trained to treat a dog's read as a data point that deserved weight. At 11:47, Steele growled. Marcus was on his feet and moving before his mind had fully assembled the scene. The woman in blue scrubs, the medication tray. Steele's posture, which was not the soft warning of 9:15, but the full-body directional alert of a dog who had completed his assessment and arrived at a conclusion. Steele had not moved from his spot. He was not lunging, not advancing. He was sitting and growling with the particular controlled intensity of a dog communicating a verdict, not an impulse. Marcus stepped into the corridor. "Hold on," he said. The nurse. Her name tag said Kowalski, and she was mid-30s, with a manner that had until this moment been professionally neutral, stopped walking and turned to face him. "Mr. Reed, I need to administer your father's 11:30 medication. I'm 20 minutes behind." "What's on the tray?" Marcus said. "His scheduled pain management and the antibiotic supplement." "It's all on his chart." Her voice had an edge to it that was not quite defensiveness, but was adjacent to it. "Your dog has been a disruption for the last 2 hours. I need you to control him so I can do my job." "He is controlled," Marcus said. "That's why he's sitting." "What is the antibiotic supplement?" She told him a name. Marcus had spent 3 hours on the phone with the attending physician and had a working knowledge of Raymond's medication protocol that was significantly more detailed than the average family member's. And the supplement she named was not on the list he had been given. "That's not on his evening protocol," Marcus said. "I spoke with Dr. Patel at 9. That wasn't on the list." A pause. Brief, the kind of pause that is not a pause, that is a decision being made behind a neutral face. "There was an update to his chart," she said. "Dr. Patel authorized it." "When?" "Earlier this evening." "What time?" Another pause. "I'd have to check the chart." "I'll wait," Marcus said. Steele had not moved. His growl had stopped, but his posture had not changed. The ears forward and locked, the body still. The attention on Kowalski, with the unwavering focus of a system that had completed its read and was simply present, bearing witness. Marcus took out his phone. He called Dr. Patel's after-hours line. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called the hospital's main line and asked to be connected to the on-call attending. He stood in the corridor with the phone to his ear and his eyes on Kowalski and the tray. And the quality of his stillness. The absolute, unperformative calm of a man who has been in genuinely dangerous situations and has learned that the most powerful thing he can do in most of them is simply not leave, filled the corridor with something that everyone in it could feel, and none of them could have named precisely. The charge nurse, Gaines, appeared at the far end of the hall. She had heard the growl and had come to assess. She looked at Kowalski, at the tray, at Marcus, at Steele, and something in her face underwent a subtle professional recalibration. It was not alarm. It was the recalibration of a person who has just added one new piece of information to a picture they have been looking at for a long time and has arrived, without wanting to, at a different picture entirely. She said nothing to Kowalski. She walked to the nursing station and pulled up the chart on the terminal. She looked at the chart for a long time. Marcus watched her from the corridor. He had spent 20 years reading the body language of people receiving information in real time. The stillness that meant denial. The forward lean that meant engagement. The particular way a person's hands stop moving when something in what they are reading has shifted the ground under them. Gaines's hands had stopped moving at the 45-second mark. She was reading the same section of the chart repeatedly, which was not what a person did when the information confirmed what they expected. "Kowalski," she said. "Come to the station." The corridor was very quiet. "Kowalski," she said, in a voice she kept level with visible effort. "Come to the station." The on-call attending arrived 11 minutes later. Dr. Miriam Falco, 40-something, the particular composure of a physician who has been roused at midnight, often enough to have made peace with it. She reviewed the chart standing at the nursing station with Marcus beside her, and her face as she read it had the quality of a face receiving information it did not expect and was organizing into implications it did not yet want to name out loud. The supplement Kowalski had been carrying was not authorized by Dr. Patel. The chart notation authorizing it had been entered at 11:22 after Marcus's call to Patel, after the evening rounds were complete, after the ward had settled into its night shift rhythm. The notation carried Dr. Patel's credentials. Dr. Patel had not entered it. This was confirmed by a 3-minute phone call that Dr. Falco made to Dr. Patel's personal number with the focused urgency of a physician who has identified a problem and is not interested in working around it. The medication on the tray, administered to a 78-year-old man already on a specific antibiotic protocol and a blood pressure regimen, would have created an interaction that Dr. Falco described to Marcus in the clipped, precise language of a professional delivering a serious finding to someone she had assessed as capable of receiving serious findings. Dangerous. Potentially fatal. Not necessarily survivable in a man of Raymond's age and current immunological state. She said it without the softening that physicians sometimes use with family members, because Marcus had not asked for softening, and because the situation, in Dr. Falco's reading of it, did not deserve it. Kowalski was escorted from the floor by hospital security at 12:19. She walked with the composed, compressed expression of a person who has been managing something for a long time and has reached the moment where the management ends, and who is now engaged in the final act of managing how they respond to that ending. She did not look at Steele as she passed. Steele watched her go with the steady, unblinking attention he brought to things that had declared their nature. She did not speak during the escort. The nursing board investigation that followed over the next 2 months documented a pattern that Harmon Valley Medical Center had not seen because it had been too incremental and too careful to see. 3 prior patients in the geriatric ward over 14 months, each of whom had experienced medication complications that had been logged as protocol errors, each of whom had been under Kowalski's primary care. The district attorney's office filed charges in March. The case was still working through the courts when the hospital's patient safety board completed its internal review, retrained its credential verification protocols, installed redundant authorization requirements for after-hours chart modifications, and issued a public statement that did not use Kowalski's name but used the word systematic in a context that left nothing ambiguous. Raymond Reed was discharged on Friday. His infection had resolved cleanly by Thursday afternoon, and Dr. Patel, who had come in person on Wednesday morning with the particular manner of a physician who has spent a night processing what almost happened on his ward and has arrived at the other side of it with both relief and fury, had shaken Marcus's hand at the door of room 312. With a grip that communicated something beyond professional courtesy, Marcus drove Raymond home on a Friday afternoon in November, with Steele in the back seat and Raymond in the passenger seat with his discharge paperwork on his lap and the careful posture of a man whose hip was improving and who had decided not to say anything about the thing. That had almost happened because saying it out loud would require looking at it directly, and he had spent 78 years managing difficulty by dealing with what was in front of him and was not inclined to change his approach now. He said about 20 miles outside Harmon, without preamble, "The dog." "What about him?" Marcus said. "Does he always do that?" "Do what?" "No." Marcus looked at the road. Steele was visible in the rearview mirror, sitting upright, ears rotating at intervals. "He doesn't always know," Marcus said. "He's right most of the time. When he's not, I pay attention to why he was wrong. Usually there's a reason." Raymond was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "James DeVoe." Yes, Raymond had met DeVoe once, at a deployment farewell in Cheyenne in 2018. He was quiet with the quality of a man who understood what it meant that the dog was here and DeVoe was not, and who had enough respect for that particular weight not to say something inadequate about it. They drove the rest of the way home without speaking, which between them was not silence, but its own kind of language. The language of two men who had spent their lives doing their jobs without making speeches about it, and who understood each other in the proportion that that life permits. Sometimes God places the guardian at the door before we know a door needs guarding. Steele sat in that corridor for 4 hours, not because Marcus told him to read the room, but because a dog trained in the most serious work that dogs are trained for brought every capability he had to the last place his handler's legacy was still alive and in danger. And that capacity did not turn off when the deployment ended. It simply found new doors. There are doors like that in every hospital in this country. In every ward where the fluorescent lights run all night, and the carts roll, and the charts get updated after the family goes home. The difference between what almost happened in room 312 and what actually happened is a growl at 11:47 and a Marine who had been trained, at great cost, to treat that growl as data. Pay attention to what your animals are telling you. Pay attention to what your instincts are telling you. And if you love someone in a place where you are not allowed to be with them every hour, be the person who is there anyway, in the chair in the corridor, not going home. If this story moved you, share it with someone who is sitting in a hospital chair right now and needs to be reminded that their presence is not a burden. It is a shield. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you have ever had an animal tell you something you weren't ready to hear and turned out to be right, we want to know. Your story may be the one that convinces someone to listen. If you believe in stories of vigilance, loyalty, and the courage of people who refuse to leave, please subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you always, the most powerful thing you can do for the people you love is simply refuse to go.